Hello, listeners. Today I have a special episode for you. It's something that I want to implement more of going forward. It's a one-off episode covering a missing persons case. Lonene Ray Rogers, or Lonnie, 29 years old, went missing from her home in Hayfield Township, Pennsylvania, on January 7th, 1981. That evening, she got into an argument with her husband. Later that same night, her husband woke up and realized Lonene was not in the house. She had left behind her hearing aid, eyeglasses, medication, car, and other personal items. She also left behind her 2 young children. After Lonene's disappearance, her husband, who is also deaf, placed their young daughter Allison for adoption. Allison is now grown and attempting to revive the investigation into her mother's disappearance. Allison was generous enough to come on the show and talk with me about her mother's disappearance and her incredible life's journey. I encourage you to check out the Justice for Lonene Facebook page and Allison's book titled A Daughter's Journey, which is available on Amazon. Here's my interview with Allison. Before we get into your mother, we obviously haven't met, and we're chatting for the first time. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and just who you are?
Sure. So outside of my mother and all of that story, I am a teacher. I have a master's degree in special education. I also have a bachelor's degree in social work. So I got the social work degree first and started working in a school system with students that had behavior concerns. And then I only did that a year before I thought, I'm going back to get certified to teach. And I got my master's in special education and then became a special education teacher. And I have been doing that for 23 years now.
That's incredible. Wow. Yeah, and we met online. I messaged you because you've been posting on social media about your missing mother, and it's been, I believe, more than 40 years now, right, since your mother's gone missing?
Correct. It's January 7th. It was 42 years.
Can you tell me and the listeners the circumstances surrounding your mother's disappearance? Because they really, really stood out to me as being rather unique.
Sure. First of all, both of my parents were deaf. My mother was deaf as a result of just childbirth. And my father was hard of hearing, which means he could hear a little bit. My mother was completely deaf. My father's deafness or hard of hearing was a result of a car accident when he was 3. That the accident resulted in brain damage that left him hard of hearing. And the circumstances around the disappearance were they met at a deaf club. So a deaf club is a place that mostly people who are deaf or know someone who is deaf or have parents that are deaf go to socialize and communicate and just feel safe to communicate in the same way. And my mother met my father at the deaf club in Erie, Pennsylvania, and they hit it off, started dating right away. And I believe it was a short courtship, and then they married. Now, my father had been off and on in a lot of trouble throughout his youth, had a criminal record that I don't believe my mother knew about at the time of their marriage. And when they married, after they married, a lot of these criminal-like tendencies were coming out, and they really struggled. It was a very tumultuous relationship. They had me. I believe it was 3 years into their marriage, and then they had a daughter. They had myself. I am hearing, obviously. And then 2 years later, I have a brother, and he was born 2 years after me, and he is also hearing. Now, shortly after my brother was born, they, again, as I say, they struggled a lot in their relationship. The day my brother was born, my father was actually in jail for staging a robbery at a bar that he worked at. and he was convicted of theft, burglary, and lying to the police because he had staged the whole thing. So my mother continued to just be very frustrated, and, she was clean cut, never got in trouble, and my father was in trouble a lot. And they then separated shortly after that time. And so when my brother was 2.5, they separated, and my mother let him come. So they separated in October of 1980, and they lived in different homes. They were separated. My mother allowed him to come back for the over the Christmas holidays into the home because she wanted him to be able to have Christmas with his children, and she didn't want to deprive him or us of that opportunity. But unfortunately, after the holidays, per their agreement, he was supposed to leave, but he refused. And so then on January 7th, let me back up. On January 6th, she came home from work and went to her father's home, her parents' home, and told her father that she was planning to leave him. She asked her father if she could borrow some money to just give her, something to help get the children and herself away from him because my father was refusing to leave the home. My father gave her $60 and said that was all that he had. And in 1980, $60 was worth a lot more than it is today. So that was all he had. He gave it to her. And on the night of January 6th, we lived in a duplex. So that means there's an apartment on the top and an apartment on the bottom. We were in the upstairs apartment. So on the night of January 6th, she came home and, the couple, my parents were arguing over dinner, and she told him that she intended to leave him and that she was done with the relationship, with the marriage. They were done. That next day, she was listed as a missing person. And what happened was at 3:00 in the morning, my father came into my room and woke me up and then woke my brother up and said, "Your mother left with another man. We have to go find her." So he then at 3:00 in the morning got us dressed and took us to the babysitter, who was also hearing impaired, pounded on the door, and her hearing children opened the door and let us in. My father said that, my mother left and that he needed to go find her, left the kids, myself and my brother, with her. And this woman, the babysitter, was actually very good friends with my mother. So she was, of course, very concerned because my mother never said anything about that, and she had just seen her. Well, a few hours are unaccounted for. He showed up for work on time at 6 a.m. like he would any other time, didn't allude to there being problems in the home, just did his job and came home. So when he came home, the babysitter had let my grandfather know through her hearing children that my mother was missing and that they didn't know where she was. And my grandfather and my great-grandfather kicked open the door and, went inside trying to find my mother, couldn't find anything. My father then ends up coming home from work, and they're in the apartment, so there's a lot of arguing and yelling, and the police were actually there. My grandfather had called the police, who came over to the apartment. My father comes home, and his dwelling is full of my grandparents and the police, and they frisk, I guess you say. My father had him empty his pockets, just kind of trying to ask him questions because he was deaf, so there was a communication barrier. My father pulls out of his pocket 3 $20 bills, $60. My grandfather loses it and says, "Where did you get that money?" He says, "Lonnie gave it to me." Now, this is the same money that she borrowed from her father to leave my father. And at that moment, my father was telling the police that my mother gave it to him. So, of course, that is yet another circumstantial piece of evidence in all of this, as my mother has now been missing for 42 years, and there has never been a sighting that was confirmed. There's never been use of her Social Security number. She's not tried to contact family or friends or myself or my brother. She's never tried to get a job. She's never tried to get medical attention, benefits of any sort. Absolutely nothing. She vanished. And my father, they have never been able to get enough evidence to prove that a crime was committed or that it wasn't committed. So it's kind of, the case has been cold and just kind of in limbo for 42 years now. He has lived free, and no one has been. My father is considered a person of interest in the case, but there has not been any evidence that has been strong enough that could make any kind of conviction or even to move forward on a trial at this point.
There's a lot to unpack there. One of the things I'm interested in, I guess it sounds like the main theory is that your father might have had something to do with your mother's disappearance. Were the police or you or anyone able to maybe come up with any other theories, or does it very much lean that your father is a person of interest and he must know something about what happened to your mom?
Well, I believe the latter of what you said. I think all fingers have pointed at my father all along. They did pursue other possibilities. There was a gentleman that my mother was very good friends with that she worked with at a hotel who was trying to actually help her leave my father. They did, look into him pretty extensively and ruled him out. I don't believe that there was anyone other than that one gentleman that they thought, could be a potential suspect, but they truly have found nothing. I mean, everything that they have, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, like the money. There was a missing blanket that he couldn't account for. There's a lot of things that may or may not mean anything if you don't know what happened to her.
So your mother goes missing, a lot of circumstantial evidence points to your father potentially being involved. What happens to you and your relationship with your father? I mean, that must be like, I just can't imagine. Like, how old were you when your mother went missing?
So I was 5, but I was literally days from my 6th birthday. So she disappeared on January 7th, and my birthday is January 12th. So I was just days from being 6, and my brother had just turned 3. So just a few months before.
Wow. Like, you're both so young. What happens after that? Yeah. Like, I can't imagine. Like, did you stay living with your father? Like, what happened?
So, we both have very different stories, meaning my brother and I. To begin with, my aunt, my mother's sister, was really, really trying to get custody of us and trying to get my father to let us stay with her. That only lasted for a few days. He allowed her to take us while he did, whatever he needed to do. But that only lasted a couple days, and he took us away, and he accused her of trying to steal us and told her she would never see us again. And I truly had only seen her a handful of times after that day until I was an adult. So all of that, my mother's side, was pretty much cut off, per my father, from seeing us. And that was my whole childhood. After that same time period, right after my mother disappeared, my father took us from my mother's sister, my Aunt Glennie, to his sister's home. And we stayed there for a couple of years, is what it turned out to be, while he was, supposedly getting himself together. So what happened is, like, he would come and get us, and then we would move in with him, and, we're going to stay with him. Well, then he would leave us, and the children's services would come in and take us away for abuse and neglect. He wouldn't feed us. He'd leave us alone. He would go to his girlfriend for a week at a time and leave no food in the house. And being the older sister, I knocked on a neighbor's door and asked for food, and then we'd get reported and then taken away, and we'd end up, at his sister's. Sometimes we were in foster care. So it was pretty difficult. Like, it was from home to home to home, whether it was his home or my aunt's home or foster care, up until I turned 14. My brother, actually, it was on his birthday. We were living with my father and going into town for a birthday dinner for my brother. My father had a pickup truck, and he had my brother and his girlfriend get in the cab of the pickup truck, and the truck bed. He told me I had to sit back there, and this was in October, and Erie, Pennsylvania is a very cold snow belt area, and it was freezing. So we drove about 20 minutes into town, and I was crying and banging on the window saying I was freezing, tears freezing to my cheeks. And he pulled into Erie Police Station and went in, and he's deaf, so he couldn't communicate very well. So he went in and he was telling the officer, I don't want her anymore. I'm leaving her here. They said, you can't do that. You can't just drop kids here. And he came out to the truck to get me because he wanted me to interpret to them what he was saying, that he's not taking me home. So I go in, my 14-year-old self, and I'm interpreting to the police officer that he's saying he doesn't want me anymore, that I'm too much trouble, and he's leaving me there. So the police officer is telling me to tell him, I'm sorry, but this is a police station. You can't just drop kids off here. Take her home, and we'll figure it out on Monday. Now, this was a Friday when this was happening. He refused. So then the police officer asked me who I could call, or who they could call on my behalf that could come take care of me, or I could stay with until Monday. I told him, you could try my aunt. We always end up there. Well, they called her, and she said, tell them to work it out. I'm done. And in her defense, my father had dropped us off there many times, but she said no. So then he said to me, okay, well, do you know anybody else? And I said, no, I don't. And out of nervousness, I put my hand in my pocket, and I felt a piece of paper. And I remembered that earlier in the day, that same day, the guidance counselor at my school had called me down because she knew, that I was coming from a very difficult home life, and she knew the story. So she was just calling me down to check on me. She knew that if I was back with my father, it wasn't a good thing. I really, at that point, was starting to kind of lose faith and said, I'm fine. Well, she writes her home phone number down on a piece of paper, hands it to me, and says, if you ever need anything, ever, day or night, this is my home phone number. You call me, and I will help you. And I was like, okay. So then that was the piece of paper that I felt in my pocket. So I said to the police officer, well, this is my teacher's phone number. She said if I needed anything, I could call day or night. And the police officer was like, okay. So he called her, and would you believe that she came to the police station and got me? And they later adopted me, and I became part of their family. And my brother, unfortunately, I was able to live, the remainder of my teenage years with them. My brother, however, remained with my father for a few more years before he got kicked out and got abused and ran away. And, he has a very difficult story living with my father.
That, it's awful and incredible, how that all played out for you. That scene in the police station just sounds horrible, where you're having to almost interpret, your own fate.
Right.
That's
right.
I can't imagine.
I can't imagine being the police officer. I mean, I can't imagine not understanding what my father's saying and looking at a 14-year-old girl saying, what? It's just crazy.
Yeah, it sounds like from the police officer's perspective, it would be surreal. It'd be like, what is happening right now? You've obviously lived a very interesting life, and I know you've written a book about that, but also about your mother. I'm curious, like, was that something that was not only to bring, awareness to your mother's case, but was that like something that was maybe therapeutic and cathartic for you as well?
Absolutely. I always liked journaling throughout my life, but from time to time, I had done some journaling, and then I didn't. And at one point, my father's sister, my aunt, had read my journal and told me I shouldn't be writing such lies about my father. And then I, did want to write, and then it was a bad thing. But, in my adult life, when I was able to kind of create a life for myself that was safe and healthy and loving, I just found a space where I learned to enjoy writing again. And I had a lot of things that I just felt like I wanted to tell. And there are many reasons for writing the book. One, of course, as you mentioned, is it's very therapeutic. Another reason is I realized that so many people never even knew about my mother's story, or many people knew me and didn't know my story, just never even questioned. And I couldn't believe how many people in the local area where my mother disappeared had never even heard of it. So I wanted to bring awareness to the case in hopes of bringing the case closer to being solved. And the final reason is I don't have my mother, and I was so young, I don't have very many memories of her. But the stories that I've heard from people about my mother just make this picture in my head of this amazing woman that I want to honor. And I feel like I'm living my life now in her honor. And I wanted this book to tell her story, to tell my story in living without her, but also to tell her resilience and what she went through in her life and what I'm now doing with that gift of resilience that she gave me, and offer that same spirit of resilience to anyone who was reading the story or listening to the story and, needed to have positive encouragement to move forward in their life, whatever they might be dealing with, or if they're in a bad relationship, give them the courage to step out. And that is what I truly want my mother's legacy to be. One of rewriting the story for good and digging deep for that resilience to reach for what you deserve in life. That
is incredible. And, it's inspiring. Just hearing you talk about it and all you've been through and the way that you've channeled it, it truly is. And what's so people listening can go get the book right now. How can they get it, and what's it called?
It is on Amazon, and if you go to Amazon, you can plug in my name, Allison Diker, last name Duiker, or you can type in the title of the book, which is A Daughter's Journey and Story of Resilience.
That's incredible. I've already added it to my wish list because it's something that I definitely want to read. And I'm sorry I didn't have time to do it before we did this. This happened pretty quickly.
Okay.
But it's incredible. And hearing you talk about it, I'm almost at a loss for words. It's just, it seemed like such an incredible human being. And you've obviously channeled a lot of this stuff and hardship that's happened in your life into, finding not just truth for your mother to what happened, but also to keep her memory alive. I'm curious, is this part of the reason you've been so active on social media and you're looking for answers? Does this almost feel like, your purpose now?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Honestly, I feel I don't really know where my future is going, but I want to use my story for good. I do have a social work degree, and there's so much of me that wants to reach out to hurting individuals and just give them hope and inspire them. And I don't know what God has in store for me or what it looks like, but I do hope that, the remainder of my life is spent helping others heal and encouraging people to reach for better and not to stay stuck when they feel like they're in a difficult situation that they're not feeling control. Just inspiring people to dig deep for that resilience that we all have.
That's incredible. I guess then I don't want to circle back to the negative, but I mean, it is a part of this story, but I'm curious, after all these years and everything that's happened, like, are you still in communication with your father? Like, what happened there? Like, I can't imagine how that dynamic could unfold.
Yeah. No, I'm not. When he dropped me off at the police station, that was pretty much the last communication I ever had with him. He lived in the same town for a good period of time that I lived in, because that was my guidance counselor in the same school district. So I, moved in with them, but I was in the same town. I worked at a restaurant in the town, as a teenager. He would visit there. And I always kind of tried to not hide, but, skirt away from him. I did not want contact with him. There were a couple times he tried to reach out, but, I would have a friend kind of jump in there when it was at the restaurant, or I just avoided him. We have not, all these years, had communication. My brother also does not have communication with him since he was, in his late teens. So neither one of us have had any relationship with my father all these years.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. I was just wondering if, have any leads or new information come in since you've kind of started this social media campaign? I guess, is there any hope that you can get some truth here?
So, is there any hope? Absolutely. The answer to that is absolutely. I wholeheartedly believe that the answer is out there. My gut tells me, from the numbers of people who have messaged me through the Justice page, the Justice for Lonene page on Facebook, the numbers of people who have messaged me saying that they know my father, they knew my father, they were afraid of my father, or telling me some awful story. I feel like the person or persons out there that have information about this case are probably afraid to say anything. And I just pray that as this case gets more and more attention, the power of the numbers behind, this cause gives whoever that individual is that has information that they may or may not even know is important, has the courage to step forward and realize that while my father was and is a very angry, aggressive man, this movement to find justice is way bigger than him. And I just pray that it leads to, closure and an answer.
Absolutely. And if someone listening out there does have some information to provide that can be helpful, what's the best way? Like, who should they contact? Where should they go?
So they can contact me personally if they wanted to talk to me or share anything with me or ask questions. I am the admin for the Justice for Lonene page on Facebook. They can also contact the Meadville, Pennsylvania State Police. The lead detective is Trooper Kevin Geibel. And the Meadville State Police would be more than happy to field any calls, questions that people may have.
That's great. I wanted to end by asking you, because you brought it up earlier, that, you don't have a ton of memories because you were very young of your mother, but you've kind of reconstructed, an image of her through stories from other people. I'm wondering, after all these years, getting this information, writing the book, kind of unraveling your mother's life, What's the thing that stands out to you the most about her, who she is as a person, or what's a memory that stands out as something that makes you feel maybe really hopeful that you will keep her memory alive and get some truth for her?
That's a great question. So this year in particular, just with the Justice page and the exposure that the case has gained, I've had more and more people telling me stories of my mother, I remember her from, or telling me different things that had happened and or their experience with my mother. And it has been absolutely amazing to hear, these funny stories that my mother was so funny and that she was lively, and how many people said she lit up a room, and how she was deaf, but she was a great dancer. My grandfather was actually a dance instructor, and my mother would dance with him when he gave lessons. And people were just awe-inspired at her resiliency. Like, how is she doing this? She can't hear, but she could feel the music better than any of us because her senses were heightened, for feeling the vibrations. So I think what really stands out to me is how much she did not take no for an answer. In her youth, people would tell her, you can't do that because you're deaf. And she would say, yes, I can. Watch. And she would do it, and I think over the this year in particular, I've learned so many neat stories of her heart, her love, her kindness, and her just refusal to accept I can't, and I guess I call that resiliency. And I see that in myself. So it's been neat to learn and more stories about her and people's experience and realize I am her. And I didn't even really know her. I mean, I lost her when I was 5. And to realize that as an adult, I did not have the luxury of growing up with her example, but yet her example is in me.
Wow. I was just lost in your words. That was beyond moving. That's incredible. I want to end it there because I think that's such a nice memory to end this on. And I want to thank you, Allison, so much for agreeing to do this and coming on.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope we can have another conversation and maybe we'll have an answer to what happened to your mother, and that would be, I hope, maybe a nice ending to this really long journey that you've been on.
For sure. I will say that through the Justice page, I'm reaching greater outlets and avenues. I was able to go to Georgia and meet with a cold case investigator who works with Nancy Grace. And I really feel like a lot of the connections and resources for people that are on the page are starting to come to life. And it's just more opportunity for exposure is getting out there. So I feel the momentum of this case, and I really feel like, we're going to move forward in whatever way it's supposed to go,
That's incredible. And it does. The Facebook page, and I'll, plug all the info and pages in the intro and the outro of this episode. But, I absolutely it seems like such a strong community on there, and that there's so many people willing to help in any way they can that, I feel the momentum too. And that's why I wanted to do this with you, just to do my small part and try and help.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
If you know anything about Lonene's disappearance, you can contact Allison through the Justice for Lonene Facebook page, or contact Pennsylvania State Police or Meadville Barracks and ask for Trooper Kevin Guy Bell. If you want to know more about Lonene's disappearance and Allison's life, you should check out her book, A Daughter's Journey. It's available on Amazon. If you enjoyed this episode and want to show your appreciation, you can buy me a coffee at the link in the description. You can also support the podcast through a Buzzsprout paid subscription option, which is also linked in the details. If you want ad-free episodes and bonus content, you can check out the Patreon, which is $5 a month. As well as ad-free and sponsor-free episodes, you'll get exclusive content and you'll get content early. I'll also post monthly updates so you know what to expect each and every month. If you have any missing persons cases or unexplained events you think I should cover, feel free to reach out through the Facebook page or email me at tyhooper8@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to the Missing and Unexplained podcast.